Let's pray again. Our Heavenly Father, we continue to commit this time to you and pray this would be a true and lasting blessing as we work through this material. I pray these things in your Son's name. Amen. Now I know that I do always tend to go really fast, but I was probably even a little bit more fast in that first one. Wasn't sure if I had the material judged to the time period right. I think I've got a little more space on this one, so I will try to go in fourth gear instead of fifth or sixth. So your goal is to keep their heart on the table, and we've talked about the ways that as parents you might inadvertently push them away. I was talking about, by mocking them or not having patience or not having the time. Those are different ways that I think that we can slowly kind of push their heart away, let it slip under the table without us doing anything about it. But we also ought to acknowledge that there's an innate impulse in most kids to start pulling their heart off the table regardless of what kind of parent you have been. It is not the case that parents misstepping is the only thing that can cause that. I think the kids, there's an innate desire to kind of start doing that. You can be the best mom or dad ever, and they start pulling away simply because they are not just your kids, but they're also the descendants of Adam and Eve. And so they will be tempted in this direction because they have unmortified flesh in them that is pulling them away. One helpful concept that I got from Doug Wilson, my father-in-law, a lot of this is just repackaged Doug Wilson here. But one helpful concept that I got from Doug was this term he calls sunny cynicism. Sunny cynicism. Sunny cynicism is the demeanor that loves everyone and is perpetually sweet while knowing that everyone is a sinner and will fail you at one point or another. Sunny cynicism is like seeing your cherub-faced 3-year-old running with scissors and an uncapped Sharpie, okay? Kid, I love you, but I also see the potential for great disaster in you. So sunny cynicism weds that love and affection of the parent with a realistic understanding that these are children of Adam and Eve who will do evil things, and you need to actually be ready to address it. There is a real art form to developing the sunny cynicism instinct that I'm describing, because it means that you cultivate an openness to suspicion without being a crank. But what I'm urging you to do is to be able to see the fallenness in your children, so that they're like, as I said, there are things that you could do that cause them to pull their heart off the table. But outside of you doing anything, that impulse is there, and you need to see it, and you need to have that sort of suspicion that prompts you to action to actually address it. So you need to be ready to see the fallenness of your children. And that's not easy for some people. I noticed this at NSA. At NSA, we get applications, we'll get our applications for the freshman class each year. And as they come in, we get their SAT scores, we get their pastoral eval, but one thing you'll always have is their transcripts. About half of our kids come from classical Christian schools of some sort, and we get transcripts from those schools, but about half of our kids tend to come from homeschooling world. And homeschooling transcripts are really funny because this is, parents are putting this together, and one of the things you notice is I'm not sure if there's a mom anywhere who's ever given less than a B+ to their children. And so there's this kind of like, you got to take some of this with a grain of salt. I think it's sometimes tough as parents to look at our kids with that realistic cynicism, to kind of suspect what's actually going on. Parents always tend to think that their son is the exceptional one who would stand strong and not compromise if they're in a difficult position. Have you ever noticed how many parents talking about their kids how many parents have had the misfortune of having their son fall under the influences of the wrong crowd? And yet, surprisingly, I've never met a parent of a son who was the wrong crowd. My son, it was terrible. He was a great kid, but he fell under the influence of the wrong crowd. That happens again and again. You never have somebody just say, my son is the wrong crowd. He's the one that your children should be on the lookout for. He's a terrible influence. Parents don't generally see their kids with that kind of suspicion. It's just other people's kids. Sunny cynicism says, your kids are sinners. Sometimes your kids are the wrong crowd. Sometimes your kids are the problem, and you should be able to suspect that of them and be able to address it in them. You should be able to suspect your kids of lying to you. You should be able to suspect them of being capable of cheating on you. It's, as a teacher, it's surprising to me to see where you've got something where it's like, this kid red-handed, we know this happened, and then their parents rush in as the defense attorneys. Like, why would you want to keep your kid in this kind of sin? Wouldn't you want to help get them out of it? I would urge you to, one element or ingredient in sunny cynicism is to take it seriously when a teacher or a coach flags something that is a concern about one of your kids. When a friend at church, a minister says, taps you on the shoulder, says, I think there's something you need to look out for here. Sunny cynicism says, I'm going to listen to that. I'm going to give a lot of weight to that. I'm going to see if there's something that I'm missing. I notice often it's strange in families where particularly in families where one of their kids is quite visibly falling away. You can tell that this is happening. And then something happens where they're caught cheating or something like that, and you go to kind of address it, and here's an opportunity to address the sin, and maybe we get to the heart of it. And what's crazy is parents will jump in as defense attorneys for their child, and in this really aggressive kind of way. And you're wondering, why would you stop what could actually unearth this sin that is there? But this is my own pet theory. I think when parents are losing their kids, when their heart is going off the table, in those moments where the police come knocking on the door or the school threatens expulsion or something like that, it's the rare opportunity for them to stand shoulder to shoulder with their child. If I stand here and say, I know you're innocent, I'm going to defend you, it's your one chance to actually stand shoulder to shoulder with the child. And so they relish that opportunity, even though they know they're defending somebody who's totally guilty of the crime. But they'll do that because it gives them a chance to have camaraderie just for a moment, a camaraderie that maybe was there years ago but is now gone, and they have kind of a glimmer of it again. Beware of that. You don't want to get into that kind of position. Your kid is a sinner, and you need to be ready to be aggressive about fighting the sin that would pull their heart off of the table. And this means that you need to be okay with a level of strictness that seems more intense than what other families employ. And I just kind of let that sink in for a moment, that you need to be ready to be okay with a level of strictness in your home, rules in your home that are completely different from those that are around you, and they seem more intense than what other families employ. Remember, we said at the beginning that your house and your family will be different. Your house and your family will be different. And this is one of the primary ways in which you will see that difference. There are some things that other kids are fine, and your kids will always know, we don't do that. Because I'm in this family, we don't do that. My parents hold me to a different standard than you do. You as a parent need to be ready to establish that standard and to be at peace with it. I'm different. I expect different things of my kids, and you can call me all kinds of names, but I'm doing something different at my home. You need to be okay with a different level of strictness at your home. Also, I would note that in general, this is the thing that I think surprises people. Kids can really thrive in a strict regime if it is consistent and it is loving. If it's consistent and it's loving, a strict regime is a wonderful place to be. You know what's expected of you. You feel the blessing and the benefits of obedience. It actually can be a really good place to be if it is consistent and loving. If it's not consistent, if it's not loving, then that's a miserable place to be. You don't want to be. You don't want to be in that. So what destroys the kids is when you deploy strictness in an unpredictable way. So, on Tuesdays, this is the rule, but apparently on Wednesdays, it doesn't matter. It just depends on what mood dad is in. That's really difficult. Or if it's done in a hypocritical fashion. Really, kids can be great with strictness, but they wither in hypocrisy. If you require one thing of them, but you just completely, you're not allowed to lose your tempers, but you lose your temper all the time, that's really a difficult place as a kid to be. They can't process that, and it scrambles them badly. So you want to make sure, yes, it's strict, but it's consistent and it's loving, all right? And that is a place where they can thrive. Also, the surprise that I'll be moving through in this talk is that this strictness that I'm describing at the front end transitions to an unusual looseness at the back end, an unusual amount of freedom and liberty at the back end. And that's going to be coming. So we start with the strict. The main goal during this period is, I think, again, to go back to my image of that kid's heart, the main goal, I think, needs to be to keep your kid's heart on the table. Keep it up there. And so you're looking for all the things that might be pulling it away. This means fending off influences that pull them into places where they can become privately compromised, where they can be pulled away from you and then compromised, put in some sort of sin that puts them, some sort of barrier of fellowship between them and coming back to you, because that's when they can get into all kinds of trouble. I want to raise my kids such that they are always keeping their heart on the table. I remember once we were, you know those the family reunions when you're meeting with family functions, but with families that have different standards, and you get some interesting dynamics that will unfold then. And we were definitely, my family with my kids, we were one thing, and particularly on the Merkle side, this is not so true on the Wilson side, but on the Merkle side, we were a little bit different than the rest of the family. And I can remember being with my extended cousins, and we had our 5 little kids, and they're off playing with my girl cousins who are younger, but upper high school, college age, and my little kids. And some commotion happens, and then my cousins come over sort of sheepishly, and they don't know what's going on. And they said, we were just playing this game, and we said, okay, this is a secret, and you can't tell your parents. And they were like, all my kids just jump up, like, we can't ever agree to that. We tell our parents. And it was like everything came to a stop. My kids are running and stand behind me, like, what just happened? And it was like, and there was a rule. There was a rule. If somebody tells you that you can't tell your parents, you get out of that situation, you go tell your parents immediately. Because I don't want them in a place where their hearts get hidden under the table and we can't have this talk. So I think establishing that really early on, like your heart is up here, we're in fellowship, we tell each other what is going on. I think that's really important. I think I'm moving into just some like really kind of practical things, but I think phones are an obvious place where this happens. When your kids get their phones and then they sort of descend into this little digital world. We let our kids have phones when they were all in sports teams and needed to be able to call from wherever they were. I think that as I've seen what is going on with the phone and social media and all of that, I could even be more cynical than we did it. I could pull back a little bit further then. But at the time, we were okay when they were old enough to be on these teams, and we would let them have a phone when they're going away. But we put significant rules around the phones. If I, as dad, am paying for that phone, then it's my phone, and that means I can look at it whenever I want. This is not a phone that you have off in private. This is a phone that we jointly have. And I can get on it and I can look through it. I can look through it whenever I want. And so I would occasionally ask for their phone and go through all of their apps to check on what was happening. I want to make sure that there's not some little corner they're descending into and developing something that's unhealthy. That's sunny cynicism. I love you, but was it trust but verify? That's kind of what it is. I love you, but I'm going to spend some time digging through and making sure this is all on the up and up. And I know that even that level of oversight, there's all kinds of ways for a kid to cloak what's going on. And I want to be cynical enough that I'm looking to see, do I think something else is going on with their phone? Do I need to look at a deeper level? One thing that I thought was really helpful was their music is always on the table for debate. I think it's interesting, it's funny how important your art is to you. And I talk about that moving into the rhetoric stage, from logic to rhetoric. As you move into the rhetoric stage is when you start to develop this sense of self. What is my aesthetic? How do I want others to see me? Okay, that's a really intense thing, and it all plays out in your music, your movies, your books that you're reading, all of those things that are, we tend to think of them as more sort of fringe artistic add-ons of some sort, accessories, but they're actually right at the core of what is going on in their heart at this moment. This is helping them to shape who they want to be, how they want to appear, and I want to have all of that on the table. Your music, your films, your books, it's on the table. Let's go over your playlist. Let's take your Spotify playlist and let's walk through it. This is a great dinner time exercise for the whole family. As a family, we're talking about what songs we're listening to, what we think about them, what we think these lyrics mean, why you think that one's actually not all right, this one we think is all right. And we'd have that argument at the table. One kid says, I think this song is good. Another kid says, I think that it's a problem. Let's have that discussion here on the table. The heart's all on the table, and let's talk through it. Explain to me what you like about this song, why you want to listen to it. I don't want my kids to live in a world where they can put their earbuds in and dissolve into a world that is completely disconnected from their parents. Now, I don't have a problem with my kids having earbuds. That's not the problem. It's, what do the earbuds signify? Do they signify I'm going to my music and that is a separate place from the rest of my family? That is, I think, a problem. And I can remember with my daughter when she hit, I can't remember what grade it was, but it was when the Hunger Games comes out. And that just sweeps through the school. Everybody's reading the Hunger Games, and we're like, yeah, you're not doing that. And she kept having questions about it, and it became clear, like, this is kind of a thing. All of her friends are talking about it. She's wondering about it. So I was like, okay, then let's you and I read it together. You read it, I'll read it, and let's talk through it as we read through this together. And we read through it together, and we talk about, here's my concerns, here's why I think this is a problem. She becomes the most vocal advocate of my position in her school and in her friend group, because we put in the time to actually walk through and make sure we are of the same mind about this book. But it was an important thing, and it seemed like such a silly little side task, but it was kind of her world for a little bit, this whole question about what do we think about this book. The movies that they watch, do we sit and watch them together, talk through what's going on, and give an argument for why we think that's a problem, that's okay. And I think it's important that you do it in a non-puritanical sort of censorious sort of way. You need to be somebody who actually understands the real world, is talking to them in a sensible way, and is trying to help them become the kind of person that can interact with this world, rather than just the kind of person who's had their hand slapped with the ruler a number of times. But you want them to be prepared for it, and you are the one that's going to prepare them for it. We were very slow to let our kids have social media. The phone was one thing, social media was a totally different thing. There's already one here. We were very slow to let them have the social media. And when they did get it, that was 100% on the table. My sons were not as interested here as much as my daughters were. They had zero interest in any of it. But my daughters, that was kind of a real thing, because it was a big part of their friendships and what people are talking about. So the rule with our girls, first of all, their social media, we all have all eyes on it and can see it. But for the longest period of time, and this was for a long period of time, the rule was our girls don't post something on social media unless they walk through it with my wife. They sit, they talk about, what do you want to say? Why do you want to say that? What's the best way of saying that? What are you trying to get across? And my wife is reading it with them, and they're working until they perfect that and put it out there. And this included not just the post, but we're talking about the comments and all of that. We didn't want a place where they're descending and being apart from us. This was something we were all doing together. We wanted to know about their friendships and what issues they were walking through in their friend circles. We were way slower to allow our kids to be part of an event that we thought would cultivate a second life kind of quality. And fairly strongly insisted that maybe, you're not going to that. Maybe you can invite them here, but you're not going over there, because we wanted to make sure that we were had eyes on what was happening. I liked it that a group of high schoolers getting together in Moscow knew that if they invited the Merkle kids to the party, then suddenly they're going to have to conform to a whole new set of standards imposed on them from outside the high school friend group. There's the high school friend group, and there's the Merkle family. And the Merkle family policy, that actually trumped the high school friend group, right? This is going to have to conform to that. And it was so healthy having my kids be raised in that, because then as they grow older and they move out into a friend circle, they can walk into a room and they could say, we're not doing that. We're just not doing that. And it's not because my dad is going to come over because they're, in college or whatever now. It's we're not doing that because I say so. We're not like that. I'm not like that. I'm not doing that. And they learn to actually have a spine and be able to stand up for themselves. And what happens is, when you raise your kids like this, when you raise your kids so that they are on your team, and on the team means parents not in an adversarial relationship with their kids, but in fellowship and developing loyalty to one another. In real, true, deep fellowship and developing loyalty to one another. When you have your kids on your team like that and loyal to your family, pretty soon they just start to become trustworthy. They become responsible and trustworthy. The principles are in their DNA, and they start to match you, and they start to be honest, and they start to, and this is kind of surprising, they start to outstrip you in their zeal for the cause. When your kids are calling you out for being too weak on something, whoa, where did you get this kind of zeal? They start to outstrip you in their zeal and their integrity for the cause. And when this happens, I think it's really important to notice it and to honor it by relaxing your rules. This is what I said. You start off with a super strict, but you come to this moment where you start backing off. You don't need to have a policy anymore because they have it in their DNA. You can tell them they don't need to ask if they can watch a movie or not because you trust them and their judgment. Early on, our deal was with our kids, if you're going to watch a movie, you need to call and get permission from us first. If they go to a friend's house and they're all sitting down to watch a movie, you're not pushing play till I call and get permission from my parents. And that's what I mean, the Merkle family is going to get imposed on that friend group. But you hit a certain point where all of a sudden, don't call me. Don't call me. You know what you think. I just want you to stand up for what you think. And you start to back off. And what's interesting is the way, ironically, this is the moment when many parents are now suddenly freaked out about what's going on in their kids' lives and starting to try to crack down. But their kids' heart's not on the table. So they try to crack down and they can't get anything. But at this point, you are taking your hands off and you are letting them be adults. You tell them they don't need to ask if they can watch a movie because you trust their judgment. And surprisingly, I found this generally happened in the middle of high school. It's right in the middle of high school, at a moment that I think everybody else is getting scared about what their teenagers are up to, but you're giving them the key and saying, do whatever, I trust you. You do it. At this point, you become more of a wise friend who gives good advice and gives good counsel, and much less of a rule maker. You're not the rule maker in their life anymore. You're more like a friend who's just the person who they talk about that movie or that song or that book with, as they're trying to figure out what they think. You're a friend giving them advice and counsel. Now, this can be really tricky, and you can misjudge the moment. You can take your hands off, and the kid on the bike crashes because they weren't ready for that yet. So it's tricky, and you can misjudge it. You can do too much at once, and you might need to back up if you see that you're moving too fast. You might need to back up and okay, let's kind of reimpose some policy for a little bit. It takes real wisdom to discern the right moment, and I would say, please don't forget your sunny cynicism. Don't, cheerfully think, oh, it's middle of high school. It's time for them to have all these freedoms, without actually being cynical enough to know whether they're ready for it. Another thing that it's hard about this is that you are personally shifting from one gear to a very different gear. This is a really difficult moment because you're shifting from high accountability, authority, to suddenly just taking your hands off and backing up and letting them go. And I think that if you don't let go, it can be as bad as not having the guide that was there early. There's not having enough rules early, and then there's not knowing when to let go of all the rules. When they're little and you run this tight ship, it's exhausting, but it's also a lot of fun. Like, I mean, there's something just really fun about having this little crew of kids that are all doing, what you ask them to do. But I think what happens is during that stage, a lot of your personal identity can get wrapped up in being that kind of family. We are going back to that Reformed assault vehicle and your family worship and all of that. It's easy to have your family identity and your personal identity wrapped up in being this kind of family. But when they become young adults, you have to cheerfully dismantle the thing that you built. Right? This thing that you built, this wonderful family, you have to start taking it all apart. Dad's authority, I need to pull this off. Mom here, I need to pull that off. You need to dismantle this thing that you built. And they move out. Your daughters get married. A new man steps into your role as our covenant head. And you have to be a cheerful fan of that. Your sons take professional paths that might look completely different from the path that you would have shoveled them along. I think that for men especially, it can be really difficult to learn what it means to give wise counsel. This is hard as a dad to back off and become the kind of counselor that your kids want to get, counsel and wisdom from. We have a tendency to simply advise our sons in such a way as to recreate our own lives. Have you ever noticed this? You lived this life. You made certain stupid mistakes. You learned from them the hard way. You got back on the path. You put it all together. And you start to see now how it's supposed to go and everything that would have been, like, if you'd done all these things, how smooth your life would have been. And so your thought is to your son, well, I have this gift to give you, which is to walk this path now without all the stupid meandering and bad mistakes. You can just walk this path, and you want to give that to them. But you're assuming that their life is going to play out exactly like yours, and you don't have the right to do that. You're giving this powerful advice from a sample size of one. Telling that your son, here's how the world works. You have a sample size of one, and that's what you're going from. And so you have to back off a little bit and understand that there's going to be some variety that's coming. I notice this when I kind of do like events like this a lot. I'm thankful this played out just right this evening, because a lot of times, so we're going to a little thing afterwards, and what frequently will happen is when you're going to go to the event afterwards, whoever's the host will come up and they'll say, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to go out to exit 43. And there's going to be a Home Depot and a billboard, and the whole time you're thinking, yeah, but you just sent me the address. I've got the address on my phone. I've got it here. I'm just going to follow this, and so I'm good. And then they'll be like, yeah, right, okay. But then there's going to be an Albertsons and a Walgreens, and they just want to give instructions. And have you noticed about how something about older men is they perfected the art of giving instructions, giving directions for how to get somewhere, because they grew up without the phones, and this was at that time a really valuable skill. They could say there'll be 3 oak trees, and then there'll be a cow, and that was really useful at one period of time in world history. That period is over, okay? Because I'm just going to look at my phone, and I'm going to go, and it's going to tell me how to get there. And it doesn't matter how often you show them you've got on the phone. They want to keep telling you about the Walgreens. So the thing is, like, I respect you, admire you because you've got this great skill of giving directions, but that skill is no longer useful. And what I see a lot of times is dads sitting there with their son who's asking for life advice, and you're giving them the third right after the Walgreens. That's not useful. It really isn't useful. You're trying to impose something that's no longer useful on them. You lived a life and learned many lessons the hard way. You want your sons to learn the easy way by simply listening to you and doing what you say. But here's the hard truth to hear. A lot of your life lessons are not actually that useful for them. Those things are not actually that useful for them. You should worry less about trying to force him down a certain path and worry more about trying to become his most encouraging fan. You want to be the one that's giving him respect and pouring into him and cheering him on as he also makes stupid decisions and makes those same things that you did, because it turns out that's actually the more important thing, is him learning those hard lessons. Skipping the hard lessons would not be a blessing to him. So you want to sit and encourage him and be his fan as he works through it all, but you don't have to manufacture your life all over again in your son who's coming after you. I'm not saying don't give practical advice. You do want to be ready to give practical advice, but what I've discovered is when I'm less inclined to tell them, here's what you need to do, when I'm much more of just the fan who's cheering for him, that's when they come and tell me, so what should I do? It's crazy if I hold back and I'm just a dad who's behind them, encouraging them. That's when they come to me and ask me for all the practical advice. And then suddenly, when I tell them about the Walgreens, it suddenly somehow becomes useful and fruitful in their life. Save it for when they have asked for, rather than trying to cram it down their throats when that's not the thing that they're looking for. There's so much here to chase, and I think we can follow some of this up. I'm going to leave as much time for Q&A as possible. But I just want to hit a couple other random just little things here and there. One thing is, I think it's impossible to walk through a subject like this without unearthing one way or another where you start to see that you've done something wrong, right? You can't walk through this without going, okay, so we screwed up there, we screwed up there. We're not perfect parents, okay? And so there's always, this is going to be unearthing places where you've done something wrong. So how do you repair damage or correct mistakes? One thing that I see a lot of is a family that has a bunch of success with all of their kids, except for one who's being a real challenge. Sometimes you have like a family where everything is easy with these four, but this fifth one somehow is extremely difficult. The tendency is to look at the success with the other kids and to say, okay, so since these four, everything is great with them, the problem is not the parenting. The problem is just in this kid. This kid is the problem. So you look to the success with the other kids and you say, okay, the parenting must be good. The problem is with this kid. I think that stepping back a little bit, when you first start having kids, you notice the sacrifices you have to make when you start having kids. No more sleep. No more, your finances take a massive hit. Your wife who was working comes home, or things change around and now you don't have near the money that you used to have, and yet your bills seem to have doubled. Your finances take a big hit. Your standard for what is a clean home is completely upended. Now everything's smeared with jelly. But then, so when you start having kids, there's a massive sacrifice that you make, and you do it. You go through the sacrifice, and then there comes a moment where you kind of start to come out the other side, where you feel like you've got it figured out, and you've settled into your groove. We know how to be parents. But when you have kids, you have to realize you're playing the genetic lottery. And what I mean is that usually, they're quite similar to you. It's two parents, and they have your genes, and they're usually quite similar to you, with sins and virtues that you can understand and can identify with. But every now and then, God gives you something random. He gives you something random with sins that you don't sympathize with, and strengths that you don't admire or respect. There are sins and strengths that you are like, where is this coming from? I don't get this kind of kid. And I think it's easy, particularly if you're parents who have sacrificed a lot and then you've gotten on top of it and you're doing well, and then all of a sudden you encounter something like that, it's easy to feel like this kid is the problem, not us. But what I'm saying is the sacrifices that you made at the beginning, you might have to keep making those. You might have to back up and be ready to give again. Because I think what happens is parents who have sacrificed a lot and have given a lot, they come to a point where they kind of aren't ready to do that anymore. You feel like you've done all that you need to do, and you feel like you don't have to sacrifice again. I don't have to be patient like that again. I don't have to learn how to control my temper like that again. But it's kind of like God is like the basketball coach when you're doing conditioning at the end of practice, and you line up on the baseline, and he blows the whistle, and you run the suicide, and he blows the whistle, and you run the suicide. And there always is this this point in the practice where you feel like no reasonable coach would blow the whistle again. And you know that's the point at which the coach is going to blow it at least 10 more times. There's so much more to do. And parenting is often like that, where we can feel like I have loved enough, I have sacrificed enough, I've been patient enough, I've been tolerant enough, and so now I can just kind of maybe watch Netflix. And it's at that moment, I think God tends to blow the whistle. And he says, okay, now this one is a little bit different, and you need to double your patience. You need to double your love. You need to double whatever it is that this kid is needing. Okay, the problem is not the kid. God called you to be a parent to this kid, and you want to be ready to give more and more and more. One image that I got from Doug that I find exceptionally helpful is, if you guys have read much of his parenting books, you'll have come across this. But his image of the bank account, it's like sometimes parents will say, "Listen, here's the rule, here's the standard. It's clearly derived from Scripture. It's a biblical thing for me to expect from my son, from my daughter," and they won't obey it. So the problem is with the child. Imagine if you had a bank account, okay, and you got a bank account, and you've got a checkbook from that bank, and you write a check for that account. Well, let's say you write a check for $1,000, but there's only $22 in the account. And you go and you try to cash that check. And they say, "I'm sorry, this check it's not going to go, it bounces." And you say, No. That's my name. That's my bank. The account number here is the account. This is all valid. They say, "Yeah, of course, it's all legit, but you don't have enough money in your account to write that kind of check." I think frequently as parents, we need to be thinking in terms of not so much, obviously we want our standards and our rules to be in line with Scripture and with God's law. We want that. But we need to make sure that there's enough money in the account for that check to clear. When my son is at a junior high class party and they're going to turn on a movie and I say, "You've got to call me and ask," and I say, "No, you can't watch that movie," and he's got to turn around to all his friends and say, "Can't watch that." Okay, you actually have to have a lot of money in the account to pull something like that. And if you only got $22, that check bounces. And it may be your standard is right. It may be the movie was a problem. It was a filthy movie they shouldn't have been watching. But you didn't have enough money in the account for you to write that kind of check. And so one of the things that you need to be thinking about is, I need to make sure my account is filled up. And if it's not filled up, I might need to watch my spending. I might need to actually be careful about what kind of checks I am writing. And that means that sometimes, and this is kind of a strange thing to say, sometimes you need to lower your standard. I'll see parents with a really rigid standard and no money in the account. And I would say, listen, it would be better for you to lower your standard, to be less strict, and to get money in the account such that you can actually be an effective parent than for you to, on the face of it, have the right moral scruples, but be kind of making a mess of the kid. Okay? So sometimes if you're thinking about some of these things, you're thinking, okay, I'm not sure if we could do that. It may be, okay, then drop the standard a little bit and try to fill up the account with the love, the respect, the fellowship, the building fellowship in the family, the loyalty in the family. You want to top that off such that you can actually go around and write those kinds of checks. Another thing to remember, this is, again, these are things I'm just stealing from Doug. We were talking around the table once, and somebody was mentioning one family, and they were like, "Why is it that all of their kids turned out great when they did all the things wrong?" And when we say the things, I'm talking about the logistics. I'm talking about the things that we would, our family policies that we would have, all these things I'm describing to you, whiffing all of that badly. And yet their kids all turn out. And somebody was saying, why is that? And Doug just said, you know what? Sometimes love trumps dumb. Sometimes love trumps dumb. And I think that that's one of the things that it's good to go back to that, because the law of God is written on your heart. And that is love. And you can come to something like this where somebody's saying, okay, here's what you need to do. Here's the policy. Here's the rule. Here's how you do that. And you're sitting there thinking, okay, well, it would have been nice to have heard maybe 10 years ago, but we're well past all of that. And so I don't know how to do all of those logistical things that you just described. Love trumps dumb. I would encourage you to dwell on, work to love and give the affection and love that is owed to them as much as possible. And it's crazy how much you might not have the wisdom to know how to deploy it, but if you have the love trumps dumb. And you want to make sure that you lean into that. And lastly, and I save this for the end, not because it's the least important, because this is actually, I think, this is the priority. This is the thing that I think you need to dwell on more than anything else. And so this is not an afterthought, but this is the ultimate priority, which is pray for them. Pray again and again for your kids. You ought to be in constant prayer. From the moment they're conceived and you know about it, you should be praying for their soul. Pray for them again and again. And do not be surprised to discover that focused prayer for your kids over a lifetime of faithfulness yields amazing fruit. It's shocking to me how regularly I can be surprised by God's specific intervening into our lives in a very clear answer to specific prayer. Pray for your kids. We live in a spiritual world where spiritual things have results in this life. Right? It has real effects in this life. There's a battle that's going on, and if you're not on your knees and in prayer for your kids, you're shirking from the battle. You're not a part of the fight that is actually going on. So I would urge you again and again to be in constant prayer for your kids. And there's kind of no excuse to not be in prayer, because you can always pray. There's just never a time where you can't be praying for them. So don't be surprised when you pray that you'll start to see specific results. And because of that, I would say pray specific prayers. Start to pray specific prayers. Pray that God would do specific things for them and that He would lead you in specific ways. There's just no situation in which you cannot get on your knees and pray for them. If you aren't consistently praying for your kids' faithfulness, I don't think that there's anything in these lectures that I've said that's really worth paying attention to. Like it start with the prayer, and then everything I've said here, that's like number 2 in your seeking for your kids' salvation. Pray for them. Pray for their future spouses. Pray for the kids that are going to come from them. But pray for them again and again. And with that, I'll close in prayer, and then we'll transition to some Q&A. I think I've left enough time for that. Our Heavenly Father, we again thank you for your kindness to us, Lord. We thank you for the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we thank you that your gospel is given to us and phrased as a covenantal blessing, that it's something that cascades through generations. We pray for that reality for this congregation, for each of the people that are here. I pray that your Spirit would be with them and they'd see real fruit and generational faithfulness. I pray these things in your Son's name. Amen.